Let us learn about the classes and the objects in the Dart programming language. And that is basically object-oriented programming, but it also supports functional programming. So classes and objects comes from the object-oriented programming. So let us go and create and learn some of the basic concept about the classes in the Dart programming language. So for that, I have added one file over here, class.basic, and here I have added a main function inside the class package. So make sure you follow the same along, or you can follow on your own file. And we'll create our first class over here, class, and we have to make use of a keyword of class and the name of the class. And this is the name of the class, and it should start with the uppercase, and which is we have added over here. So what is a class actually? So theoretically, we can say class is a blueprint of an object. So what is an object? Student is an object, and this class is a blueprint for this particular object. So the blueprint, like, it can have a properties and the methods and all of those other stuff. And when you create a building, or when you are creating something like constructing a building or a factory or a housing, you have a blueprint of that particular housing, right? So you have a blueprint for your factory, you have a blueprint for your building. So you can consider the same thing. So we have a student object, and this object of a student has some blueprint, right? How does it function? What is its properties, right? So that's the basic about the class. And if you want to create an instance, how do we instantiate this class? In order to make use of this object student, we have to instantiate it. So how do we instantiate it? Is create a var and student. Sorry, what I did over here is over here. So var student, which is equals to student over here. And now this will instantiate a new object of our student class. So here we create a new instance of the student object. So here we create a new instance of the student object, and if you go and print out this one and student over here, and if I go and run this one, you'll see that it will print out the instance of the student, because this will create a new instance. So some of the programming, like if you're coming from Java or any other programming, you have to make use of a new. But in the Dart, in the older version of the Dart, we have to make use of a new keyword. But now from above the 2.2, I think above the 2.2 version of the Dart, we don't have to make use of the new keyword over here, because that is redundant, which means that it is already by default added. So we can remove this one and just simply type the object over here. This will create a new instance. This is basically same as creating a new over here, adding a new keyword. So now we don't have to add that new keyword over here. And now let us say this is a class, and class should have some properties and the functionality, right? So what we'll do is we will add some property over here, and I'll just say string first name that we have, right? And let's say another one, string as the last name that we have, and also let's say int, and we will add a age over here. So now we have a 3 property, and now it is saying that it cannot be of null and must be initialized. So you can either set it as a nullable over here. You can also set it as a nullable if you don't want to add a default value over here. But if you want to add a default value, like let's say for this one, we don't want to add a nullable for now, and we want to set it some value by default, right? So here we will just say empty value or empty string, and this one can be of a nullable over here. And now if I go and want to access this property, so how do we access that particular property? I can go and student, right? So if new student object that we have dot, I have a first name, and now I can set that one. So if I just go and print out this one, if I want to print out this one, print, and I need first name, right? So student dot the first name, I can print out this one, and if I go and print out, you'll see that there is nothing. It's an empty string, right? So we have an empty string. Similarly, we have for the the last name, and also for the age. So you can just go and print out the default value, and it is null, and all of those are the empty value. So if you want to set up, so this is accessing, you are access the property over here. And how do we set the value? So set the property value over here. So how do we set the value is I can just call directly student dot. I will set the first name first of all, and just add that one. And similarly we have student dot the last name that we have, and I will just add that one. And then we have another one of the property as the age, which is equals to, I'll just give it as 35 for now. And now if we go and print out again, then we should get that print of all of those values. Just print out from here and just run this program again, and you'll see that it has printed out all of the values. So this is how we set the value, get the value, and we set the value. But this is not a good way of doing so. Let's say if you want to initialize it. So here we have creating a new instance of this particular class student, and then we are setting the value. So what we want to do now is we don't want to set all of this stuff. What we want to do is we want to have a constructor object over here. So for that, how do we create a constructor is we need to create a student over here, and here we will pass a constructor object over here, and I can just call this dot the what we have is the first name first of all, and this dot the last name, and then we have a this dot the age over here. Now I can remove this one. I don't need to set for now, the error is already gone because we have a constructor, a default constructor that we have already set up over here. So now we have set up a default constructor, and now we can set the value over here. Now if you go back and you will see that we need to pass the 3 arguments over here. 3 positional arguments are expected. But let's say we don't want to set this one as a positional argument. We want to set up as an optional argument or the. So what we can do is for that, I can just optional, make it as an optional. So if I want to make it optional, I will add it as a bracket over here. So when you add an optional, then we have to make this as a nullable, otherwise that will give us an error again. So this is how we can set it as optional. But let's say we want to, now this is still optional, and let's say if you want to make it as a named argument. So the classes are quite similar to the function that we have previously created, optional parameter and the name argument, optional argument. So all of those we have learned, right? So let's remove this one from here, and what we'll do is we'll add a named argument for this one. So let us add a value brace over here. Now this will become a named argument over here. So now if I remove this one, you will still get an error, right? Okay. So now we have an optional argument, and now here we can just access it by the first name, right? First name we can set the value, and then we have another one as the last name, and this one we will just set it as the one, right? And then we have a last name as the age, another one. So we can set this value, but still we have an error because we need to set this can't be null, otherwise we have to set it as a nullable. So how do we fix this one is we have to make it as a required, which means that the user must pass in this value, same as the function that we previously used, right? So now we don't have to pass it as make it as a nullable. So if you want to make it as a nullable, then you have to make it this value as a nullable over here, or you have to make a default value something like this is of a 0 over here, and then this required you can remove it over here, right? So what it's still saying is it's still age can have a null value, so we have to make it as a null. So we cannot have a default value, or the default value we can also set it as a 0 over here. So what we will do is we will remove this one because we have set it as a default value, and now we don't have to pass in that one. And now if you go and run this one, we'll get a default value. So I think we will change the default value over here, and then we'll just let's say John Shaw, and then we'll just go and run this one, and we'll just get John Shaw null and Richard the one and then 35. So here we are in the constructor, we are directly setting the value, and here we are setting the value through the property. So this is not a good practice. If you see that the user are able to change the value after we have set up again. So when we set the value over here, and then user are able to again set the value. So that's another good practice. And we don't want the user to set the value directly through the accessing through this particular property. So they can only set through the constructor. And for that, what we can do is we can just make it as a final for this one. Final and final over here. Now I will just remove this one, and now you can see that we don't have access to this particular property over here. So user are not able to set this one. So first name can't be used as a setter because it is a final value. Try to create a setter or make the first name as a non-final. So when we set this as a final variable, then we are not able to set the value. Sorry, I need to just comment out this one. And what we can do is we can create a multiple instance of this object. So I'll just say student1 over here, and let me print out this student1 which over here, and I can just remove this one, or let me keep it as this. Let me make it as a student2, right? And just duplicate this line, and this one will be of a student2, and now we can pass a different over here. So I'll just pass it as a Richard, and last name as the one, and else we can also pass the age over here, and 30. So what we will do is we will just go and run this one again, and then you can see that we have two different object of the student object. So we have a student object created a two different type over here, which is of student1 and then student2, and we are printing all of the values over here. And the classes can also have some functions, right? So, or the methods. So what we will have to do is we need to add some functionality to this student class. So let us create a function. I'll just call it as a void because it's not going to return, and I'll just say print the length of the name, or you can just call it as a first name. So print the length of the first name, and LN and GTS length of the first name. So here we'll just do nothing but just print out the length of the of our this dot. We have the first name, right? First name dot the length. We'll just print out this one. So how do we call this function? From our over here, and that one is from here. So we have a student1 and a student2, and here we will just say call the object, sorry, obj object function over here, and then what we will do is we will just call the student1 dot the we have print the length of the first name. And if you run that one, that should print out the length of that one is 4. So you can also add a string interpolation over here. The length of the name. And here I'll just create a dollar sign, string interpolation, and add the curly brace. That should be fine. So now if you run this one, then we should print out the length of the name is of 4. So this is the functionality that we can add. You can have a multiple function inside the class. Also, it has the properties and the function or the methods. And what we will do now is, let's say if you want to just access this particular student this function directly without creating an object. Here we are creating an object, and let's say if you want to do like something like student, student, student that we have, and then I want to dot and access that particular function or the method over here. So how we can do that one is, I can just create a static function over here, a static function or a static variable. We can create static properties and all of those stuff you can create. So we have to make use of a static keyword over here, static. And now if you go over here, it gives you an error because this is a static function and cannot be accessed through the instance. So if you want to access through the instance, we cannot do that one. Since this is a static function, we have to directly access without creating an object. So instance variable. So if you like instance variable, I can access that particular function over here, right? And if you go and just run, study the reach an error. So where is the error? So here, this is the, I have to remove this one. And first name, I cannot access the static. So since this is a static function, right, so we cannot access that particular variable it's mentioning. So if this is an error, then how do we get the length of that particular first name, right? So we can pass in as a string, and we'll pass in as the first name over here. And now when we call this function, we can pass our student object of the first name, right? And this will give us the length of that particular first name, or the name that we have passed in. The length of the name is 4. So I think that's all for this lesson. It's quite long already, and hope you learned something new about the classes on the Dart. And just go and make sure you practice it, and we'll come up with some of the new lecture on the classes on the next video. Till then, have a great day.